And Belfort said he considers himself a stand-up guy. But the truth is once you roll over on somebody, you're not a stand-up guy. Hey, this is Matt Cox, and I'm going to do a reaction video on Jordan Belfort, the Wolf of Wall Street's interview by Vlad on VladTV. So I guess he was, not sure when he was interviewed, but I do know that Vlad released an interview from Belfort where he kind of breaks down, obviously VladTV, he breaks down different segments of his interviews. He'll do a long interview and then break it apart. I was actually interviewed by VladTV, and he did the same thing. That's just like his thing. And then one day, weeks later, he'll just release the video. So he interviewed the Wolf of Wall Street and talked to him about the movie. And one of the things he did was talk about Jordan Belfort cooperating. And so Colby, my video producer, said I needed to do a reaction video to this. So check it out. I'm going to play the video now, and here it is. We got the Vlad intro.
But at one point, the feds came in, and there's charges pending. Now, there's a whole part in the movie where you're wearing a wire.
Correct.
Did that actually happen?
Yeah, so I'll tell you what happened. It's really interesting. So when I got indicted, right, I was under indictment, and they were threatening to indict my wife, so I had no choice but to cooperate, and everyone in the case cooperated, right? And my lawyer's like, listen, you're not going to have to testify against anyone. Everyone cooperates in these cases because the way it works in the U.S. is that the penalties are so outlandishly bad. If you don't cooperate, you're going to jail for 30 years. And if you do, you can get literally 2 or 3 years. So everyone in Wall Street pretty much will cooperate. It's very common. 95% of the people cooperate. So
Okay, so I'm going to stop it there. So he's talking about cooperation. Obviously, listen, all criminals, cooperate. Not 100%, but it's outrageously high. It really is it really is in the 90s. So first of all, the federal court system, or the federal prosecutors, have a 97% conviction rate, which means when they go to trial, 97% of the time, people are found guilty. And most of them are given. If you go to trial, you're getting sentenced to prison. So he's right. Obviously, Belfort's right about the sentences are outrageous. You have to think if you're guilty, almost everybody cooperates, unless you're guilty and you think, hey, I don't think they have anything on me. And I've met quite a few of these guys, especially white-collar guys, who think that they can beat the feds at trial because they've watched too much Law and Order, and they think, well, they never caught me with anything, or they don't have me on a taped conversation where I said anything. It's these other guys, and my lawyer, they won't be able to testify against me, and I'll get a good lawyer and he'll get me off. But the truth is, you almost never do get off. And what people don't realize is that despite Law and Order and all of these, legal shows, the fact remains that in the federal system, unlike the state system, the federal system is extremely liberal as far as what's allowed to be presented in front of a jury. Now you get to hearsay in the federal system. All kinds of documents are allowed in that wouldn't be allowed in to state courts. And a lot of people think it's the reverse. They're like, oh no, the feds really help protect the criminals' rights, but they really don't. A lot of people will also say that white-collar criminals, they don't get any time. And the truth of the matter is, if you first get convicted of a charge and you take a plea, you probably get very little time, especially because in white-collar crimes, because a good majority of these guys cooperate. Not that everybody doesn't cooperate. Like drug offenders cooperate, pretty much across the board, everyone cooperates. The people that are really in the worst position is people that, some guy that robs a bank, he has nobody to cooperate against. Like if it's just you and you rob a bank, you've got a problem because you have nobody to cooperate against. So you're going to get, if you use a gun, you get between 7 to 10 years. If you use a note, you get probably around 3 years, depending on how many banks and how often you've done it and your criminal history. Hey, I hope you're enjoying the video. And if you're interested in buying a painting from me, my contact information is in the description box. Back to the video. The thing about white collar crimes is most people cooperate because when the prosecutor or your lawyer sits down and explains how the federal sentencing guidelines work, Belfort is absolutely correct. These sentences are outrageous. So if you're a first-time offender and it's not a lot of money, you can get basically probation, which is what happened in my case. I got probation. But even if it's a few $1 million, like it could be $2 or $3 million, you're probably still you can plead guilty, cooperate and get a month or two, or not cooperate and take a plea for a couple $1 million and get a few years. Like I know guys that stole $3 or $4 million and ended up getting like 3 years. So, Belfort's absolutely right though. If you are extremely guilty and it's $40 or $50 million and the crime was complicated, let's say you start getting enhancements for sophisticated means and being the leader organizer and having multiple victims, which he had hundreds of victims, you can very quickly raise the bar as far as what you're facing. And he was probably facing 25 or 30 years if he didn't cooperate. So he has no choice but to cooperate. A lot of people are going to say, oh, he knew what he was doing was wrong. He was hiding money and he was taking money from people and he was losing their life savings and everything. But in the end, he's a white collar guy. He's terrified to go to prison and he cooperated. And so, yeah, he's also thinking to himself, everybody's rolling over on me. Everybody's cooperating against me. So it's stupid to sit there and say, I'm going to stay strong and I'm not going to cooperate. I mean, he's not a gangster. He's not John Gotti. So anyway, yeah, he cooperated. And I love that he explains what happened. Like, this is great.
I cooperated and I was giving them information. And then they asked me to wear a wire. And it was against a and I wore a wire for them once or twice, but I was being very coy. I didn't do it in a way that would get anyone in trouble, right? Then they asked me to wear a wire against a close friend of mine. The other people I didn't even know, right? And that was where I drew the line. I said, I can't rat my friend out. And I slipped my friend a note saying, I'm wired, don't incriminate yourself. And at that moment, I felt really good about that. I'm like, I'm a really stand-up guy, and it's the right thing to do, and to be strong and not to rat your friend out. Until 3 months later, they came knocking on my door with the note. He got in trouble and fucking turned me in, the guy, and showed them the note. And it was at that point, I was like, fuck it. I'm like, I lost all faith in humanity. Then I cooperated, and I actually did I was more aggressive with it. Because after that, I was like, literally, this was like the biggest mistake of my life, because I was facing at that point, when I was caught with that note, 30 years in jail. And I was very lucky that the FBI agent, who I have tremendous respect for, did not press to have me thrown in jail for 30 years. And that could have destroyed my life. And it was that point I was like,
all right, I'm going to stop it. So here's the thing. What he did when he slips his friend the note, that's obstruction of justice. I've seen a lot of guys who have cooperated. Like I knew one guy who had cooperated. He'd worn a wire against several co-defendants, and then one of his co-defendants I forget what he did exactly, but it pissed him off, and he called the co-defendant and threatened him. And the U.S. attorney threw out all of his former cooperation and said, you're obstructing justice. You threatened a witness. And even though he had helped get them a bunch of indictments, they threw out all of his cooperation, and the guy ended up getting like 15 years when he probably should have gotten 4 or 5. Hey, sorry for interrupting the video, but I want to let you guys know that if you join my Patreon at the top tier, every single month you get a different painting, and the contact information for my Patreon page is in the description. Back to the video. I knew another guy who had cooperated, and several people were being indicted, and a couple of guys came to his house not knowing he was cooperating. And when they came to his house, they were wired. And so they came to his house and they were like, "Oh my God, bro! Like we were, I've been indicted, and they raided my office, and and I don't know what to do. And he said, look, what I'm suggesting you do is go get a lawyer. Like, go get a lawyer, fight these people, do whatever you have to do. But, I can't help you. I don't know what to tell you. They've indicted me too. I'm just waiting. My lawyer told me not to talk to anybody. And they were like, oh, okay, cool. Well, they left. Turns out they called that obstruction of justice because they said you suggested that he go get a lawyer and that basically he fight or he mount some kind of a defense or something. And as a result of that, they threw away all of his prior cooperation. And he ended up getting whatever it was, 10 years instead of getting the 2 or 3 years he should have gotten. So Belfort was really lucky that they didn't push the obstruction of justice charge that they could have charged him with and thrown out all of his prior cooperation. Now, the reason they probably didn't, what he doesn't realize, is that once they've made that decision and the feds continue, so once the feds realize, okay, you basically tried to thwart our investigation into these other into your co-defendants or these other conspirators. At that point, they should have they could have shut it down and said, we're throwing out your prior cooperation and we're going to hit you with the maximum sentence. Now, they didn't do that because they still needed him to cooperate. And at that point, he decided, I'm going to continue to cooperate. And they had to make the decision at that point whether to continue to use him or not, because you can't continue to use him and then bring up the other thing. So he continued to cooperate, and they went ahead and gave him all of his cooperation. He got a sweetheart deal. He ended up getting, I forget, like 4 years or something. It was outrageously low. The other thing I wanted to mention was that, when he says like he just lost all faith in humanity. Listen, in my own personal case, the first time I got in trouble, and I talk about this, like I wrote a book about this, I have a similar case where I went to prison and I ended up writing a memoir. Jordan Belfort wrote his book, The Wolf of Wall Street. When I wrote my book, and in the book I mentioned this, I talk about the first time I ever got in trouble. Like, my attorney told me to cooperate against several of the brokers that worked for me, and I said, "Oh, I'm not going to do that." I just thought I'm going to be tough, and I'm just like what Belfort's saying. Like, I'm a stand-up guy, and and Belfort said he considers himself a stand-up guy. But the truth is once you roll over on somebody, you're not a stand-up guy. Like, a stand-up guy is supposed to take the heat, go to prison, and just do his time and not involve anybody else. That's just stupid. Like, what Belfort did was absolutely the right thing. He's got a wife. He's got a kid. These people are going to turn on him, and they all did. So the first time I got in trouble, I didn't tell on anybody. I was looking at jail time. I didn't think I was, and my lawyer was telling me I was, but I knew I hadn't lost any money. He's telling me, you've lost $500,000. I'm saying I didn't lose any money. I'm still making the payments. I've sold the properties. Nobody lost any money. And I just thought he was trying to scare me. And he was. Turns out I didn't lose any money. I had no restitution. And I got 3 years probation. So I didn't say anything. The second time, I went on the run because I knew I was extremely guilty. And I had stolen another $11.5 million while I was on probation. So I went on the run. And when they caught me 3 years later, they said, you need to cooperate. Now, unlike Belfort, by that point, I had realized that everybody in my case had already cooperated because it had been 3 years, so they were already cooperating. So I immediately cooperated against everybody. Like, there was nobody, with the exception of my ex-wife, who didn't cooperate against me. Everyone cooperated. People were calling up the FBI that had nothing to do with my case and were offering to cooperate. Like, I can tell you this, I can tell you that. It's like, what are you doing? You're not even in trouble. So I immediately tried to cooperate, and knew everybody was going to roll over on me. And, once you go through that, you think you're going to be strong and you're going to take the charge and you're going to go to prison and that's just the way it is and I'm going to be a man. Listen, the moment they close that door and people stop answering your phone, and you start to realize how screwed you are, listen, almost everybody starts to cooperate. So, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and play this and continue playing here. See what happens with old Belfort. I love that he said, I consider myself a stand-up guy. Like, no, you're not. Like, people are so concerned about that, like being a stand-up guy, and I don't want people to think I'm a snitch. And bro, like, what do you care what anybody thinks? I don't care what these people think. Listen, everybody's going to turn on you the moment you go to prison anyway. They're all going to be talking shit about you. So I'm not worried about impressing any of these people.
Destroyed my life. And it was that point I was like, this is it. There are no friends. Everyone's out to fuck you. And then I did more wire more aggressively.
Right. Well, the friend
Absolutely.
that you talk about wearing a wire for, was that Danny Porish?
No. So poor Danny got the Danny got the whole brunt of it. He had nothing to do with this. It was a completely different person. But what happened in the movie is a lot of characters got collapsed into Danny. So anything bad Danny did. So Danny did not do a lot of the stuff.
Okay. And you were basically, charged with scamming people out of $200 million?
No. So so this is the actual money loss was far, far, far lower. It was probably more around $40 to $50 million. That's the real number. Danny was accused for $200 million. Same case. They said when it got to me, it was 100. It went down to $100 million. The truth was, they didn't know at the time, so they just picked some number of all the money that was sent in. It started at 200, then was reduced to 100. It's very similar. When anyone gets caught, they always say it was $5 billion, and it ends up being $1 billion. So yes, people lost money, but the number was closer to probably around 40 to 50 million.
Okay, so here is another thing that he says that I love, because the truth is that happens all the time. When I first got caught by the FBI. I'm sorry, I got called by the Secret Service. But when I was being debriefed by the FBI, they were saying that my mortgage company had done. They were like, it's $40 or $50 million in fraud, and I was like, whoa! I've never seen like they just started throwing numbers out there, and what they had done was they just estimated that about 50 or 60% of all the mortgages that went through a mortgage company within the prior year of my fraud or of me going on the run, they assumed about half those mortgages. Those are about like $100 million. They assumed about 50 to 60% of those were all fraudulent mortgages. So they said, yeah, it's $50 million in fraud. It's like, you don't even know. They just throw it out there like that, and they're ready to charge me for that. The other thing they did was they then, once I said, look, once we started arguing where I said, look, I want to see that paperwork. Like, I don't know how you're coming up with these numbers. They said, well, we're going to drop that part. And they said, here's what we're going to do, though, is we are going to charge you with $26 million in fraud because we know we can prove that number. I said, really? Well, where's the paperwork that proves that number? Because I don't think that I'm involved. I've done $20 million in fraud or $26 million in fraud. Then they came back about a week later and they said, well, we believe it's $15 million in fraud and $9.5 million in loss. Well, first they said it was $15 million in loss also. And I said, that's not true. That figure was offset by the actual property that was resold. So then a week or two later, they come back and they say, okay, $9.5 million in fraud. And just before I was sentenced, well, they said in loss. It was $15 million in fraud, $6 million in loss. So I argue with them for a little bit, for like a week or so, and then they finally come back and they go, $6 million. Will you accept $6 million? Because the truth is, there's so much paperwork, the agents don't even want to go through it, and they don't really know what's fraud and what's not fraud. Because if you bought, like in his case, you're buying stock, you don't know if the company goes under or not. Maybe it was inflated, but who can determine how much it was inflated? And you still have a company. So the stock's worth something. So it's the same thing with mortgages. If I got you a $200,000 mortgage and it was on a house that you have an appraisal that says it's worth $200,000, but really the house is only worth $100,000, then there's a potential of $100,000 in fraud. But then if you make the payments, how much can you really say was fraud at all if you continue to make the payment? So there's an ambiguity there. And what they do is they just start high and they argue with you and argue with you and argue with you until we finally got down to $6 million in loss. The truth is, if they had to come up with the actual figure, it would take them months and months. Shoot, it could take them a year to try and come up with an accurate figure of exactly how much loss there truly was. So finally, they just got me to agree that there was $6 million in loss because I was about to be sentenced, and at that point, $6 million in loss didn't really matter to me. I was concerned about the time. You don't really worry about the loss until after you've finished your sentence, and now they start saying, hey, by the way, you still owe us $6 million, and they start asking you for restitution payments. Anyway, super interesting interview on Vlad. You definitely should watch it. Like, Belfort is extremely charismatic to this day, charismatic, and it's a great video, great interview. So you should check it out. And I appreciate you guys watching. See ya.